Ms. Christine Ramon, Ms. Erica Subonting, Managing Director, AngloGold Ashanti of Obuasi Mine, the officials and staff of AngloGold Ashanti and the University of Ghana, all invited guests, and especially self-invited participants from around the world. Greetings, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Sawubona, wherever you are in the world. My name is Georgie Chikata, Director of the Institute of African Studies, and it is my pleasant duty to warmly welcome you in the name of the Institute of African Studies, the College of Humanities, and the University of Ghana to the 7th AngloGold Ashanti Lecture on Business in Africa. This lecture is very special to us because it is born out of a remarkable partnership between one of the most prominent centers of African studies in the world and a mining giant with strong ties to Ghana, AngloGold Ashanti. The intersection of interests may not be obvious to all, and we are eternally appreciative that AngloGold Ashanti had the foresight and deep understanding to see the importance of engaging with a community such as ours that studies Africa from an African-centered perspective as a contribution to the regeneration of Africa and its peoples. The Institute of African Studies was established in 1961 through the instrumentality of Ghana's first president, Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who insisted that Africa's own thinkers in all spheres take center stage in all conversations about our continent, and that our views become decisive in shaping the narratives about Africa. Business and industry were an integral part of the Africa that Nkrumah wanted to promote. Many of you will recall that he prioritized industrialization as a way out of Africa's development challenges, and his 2.85 billion 7-year development plan for Ghana, and some of the signal infrastructural projects he planned and implemented, particularly the Volta River project, which was to power an alumina smelter, Valco, and other important industries across Africa and West Africa, were an important part of his vision for a united and prosperous Africa. The Institute was established to promote this vision, and this mandate continues to animate our teaching, our research, and outreach activities, and our specific contributions to public discourse. The AngloGold Ashanti Lecture on Business in Africa is a major annual event on the University of Ghana's academic calendar. It was instituted in recognition of AngloGold Ashanti's role in endowing the Kwame Nkrumah Chair in African Studies, a chair established in 2007 with a twofold aim: one, to honor President Nkrumah for his significant intellectual contributions and for his vision and commitment to the liberation and development of Africans on the continent and in the diaspora, and two, to promote research, knowledge, preservation, and dissemination, as well as teaching in African studies. This is the first time we are holding the AngloGold Ashanti Lectures on Business in Africa virtually. While we will not have the pleasure of welcoming our esteemed speaker, Ms. Ramon, to our beautiful campus at the University of Ghana and to our institute, the Kwame Nkrumah Complex, we are very excited by the fact that many more people in Ghana, South Africa, across Africa, and the world can participate. COVID-19 is teaching us new ways that we have to embrace to thrive in the world at this time and in the future. We are truly pleased and proud that we have been able to sustain these lecture series since the first was delivered in 2009. We have also had remarkable success in terms of the caliber of speakers we have attracted. The brochure we have produced for the occasion details their names and topics. Let me just say that each of the 6 lectures tackled a really topical issue that answered fundamental questions about the private sector's role in Africa's development. The lectures are published for those who are interested. Today's lecture will be no different. It is to be delivered by a remarkable person who, by dint of hard work and managerial brilliance, has risen to the top of AngloGold Ashanti as its interim chief executive officer. She will speak to us on the topic, building a resilient, sustainable organization during a global pandemic, lessons from COVID-19 for Africa. She could not have selected a more pertinent topic for our times, and we look forward to listening to her and engaging with her on her thoughts. This is a very important time for the Kwame Nkrumah Chair. The Council of the University of Ghana has just announced the appointment of Professor Amina Mama, Professor of Gender Studies at the University of California, Davis, as the fourth occupant of the Nkrumah Chair. She is due to start 1st November 2020. Amina Mama brings to the chair a very high profile and many years of critical scholarship on Africa, and we are excited and looking forward to working with her. It is now my privilege to introduce to you the chair of this auspicious occasion. She has insisted that she not be subjected to any long introduction. Therefore, let me just say a few words about her. Ms. Karina Kumi-Tano is a business leader with extensive professional experience and significant executive leadership accomplishments in the finance sector. She's a chartered accountant with an executive career in banking spanning 22 years, her last position being at managing director level. She's currently a non-executive director at First Atlantic Bank, Ghana, Prudential Life Insurance, Ghana, and Beneficial Bank, Ghana. Ms. Kumi-Tano and Angola, and she has also worked as an accountant and auditor in the UK and the USA. She's particularly interested in promoting inter-African trade and all things African, particularly entrepreneurial young people and small businesses. Ms. Kumi-Tano is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales and holds a BSc and MBA in Business Administration from the University of Ghana Business School. We at the Institute of African Studies feel very fortunate to have her as a member of our Institute's Management Committee, and we have benefited immensely from her wise counsel and her business acumen. We are beyond certain that she'll be an excellent and engaged chair for this event. Finally, I wish to thank all of you for joining us and wish all of us an enjoyable event. I also want to express my gratitude to the teams at the Institute of African Studies and AngloGold Ashanti who have made this lecture possible. Thank you, Medase, Akpenami, Nkosi, Giabonga. I now would like to ask Ms. Karina Kumi-Tano to assume her position as chair. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Georgie Chikata, for what was really quite a long introduction, but I hope it didn't bore too many people. And I would like to apologize also for that rather rocky start to the proceedings for today. My thanks also go to Georgie for the opportunity to be here at this function, and most of all for the honor of chairing this year's AngloGold Ashanti Lecture in Business in Africa. Today's lecture is the 6th in an annual series, and as the director pointed out, the first to have continental and perhaps even a global audience, thanks to modern digital and communication technology, but mostly due to the global pandemic we are currently experiencing, which ironically, but also fittingly, is the subject of today's lecture. Our topic, as the director pointed out, is building a resilient, sustainable organization during a global pandemic, lessons from COVID-19 for Africa. Since March of this year, everything has changed for us. Our educational systems, working and personal lives have all been seriously impacted by this highly communicable and deadly disease. It is becoming increasingly apparent as the year progresses that going forward, our working protocols and ways of socializing must take this on board. There really is no going back to the old ways. Instead, as employers and employees, and as citizens together, we will have to build a new norm create more resilient businesses, stronger economies, and most of all, more effective public health systems. Today's offering is an opportunity for us to learn from the experiences of others. In this case, from AngloGold Ashanti, AGA, the third largest producer of gold in the world, which has 14 operations in 9 different countries. AGA is a company whose shares are quoted globally on 2 European bourses and on 5 stock exchanges, including our own Ghana Stock Exchange. And I assure you that with the presence of both the MD and the CEO, we have a veritable fountain of knowledge and experience to access. Our main speaker for today will be Ms. Christine Ramon, the Interim Chief Executive Officer of AngloGold Ashanti. She's based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And she'll be introduced by our own Mr. Eric Asubonting, the MD of AngloGold Ashanti's Obuasi subsidiary. He is the president also of the Ghana Chamber of Mines. Like all of us, he's an accountant by training, and moreover has more than 16 years experience in the leadership and management in the mining sector. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be mesmerized. And if you have any questions after the lecture, you will have the opportunity to ask them. For those unavailable to attend, I believe the lecture will be streamed on Facebook by Citi FM. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Eric Asubonting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm particularly happy that in spite of the challenges that we are facing in this pandemic year, we've been able to work together with the Institute of African Studies to pull off this year's lecture. Madam Chairperson, the Interim Chief Executive Officer of AngloGold Ashanti, the Executive Vice President Corporate Affairs, AngloGold Ashanti, the Director of African Studies, the occupant of the Kwame Nkrumah Chair, colleagues from AngloGold Ashanti, our cherished stakeholders of both AngloGold Ashanti and the Institute of African Studies, the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. That is if you are in Ghana, and good evening if you are in South Africa. And I'm sure others are calling in from jurisdictions that might be morning. I'm delighted to be part of this forum, which seeks to deepen the links of our company, AngloGold Ashanti, and the noble efforts of all who seek to promote the relevance of Africa in global affairs. I acknowledge the esteemed group of leaders who have been invited to bring greater meaning to today's event. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to the annual AngloGold Ashanti Business in Africa lecture series. Unlike previous lectures, the incidence of the COVID-19 pandemic and its accompanying protocols demand that this year's lecture goes virtual. Incidentally, this seemingly unfortunate development has granted us the opportunity to reach some audience who otherwise may not have been able to be physically present. Indeed, I am tempted to say the clouds of COVID-19 have a golden lining. Madam Chairperson, distinguished guests, AngloGold Ashanti's claim to the status of a key Africa player is derived from our global presence. As a Pan-African investor, AngloGold Ashanti currently operates in 4 countries across the continent. These are Ghana, Guinea, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Until the recent sale of assets, this list included South Africa and Mali. AngloGold Ashanti employs more than 20,000 people, including contractors on the continent. The company continues to build its African operations, investing millions of dollars annually to sustain and grow its portfolio. It is from this operational Africa platform that we reach out to other continents in our operations. Building on this great foundation of knowledge and experience in Africa, AngloGold Ashanti has been funding with remarkable success the University of Ghana's Institute of Africa Studies Kwame Nkrumah Chair since its launch in 2007. I particularly applaud the current chair, Professor Amina Mama, for accepting this mandate to continue to promote the objectives and academic significance of the chair. In line with the institution's vision to disseminate knowledge, AngloGold Ashanti is happy to use this platform and the company as a case study to depict how an African world-class organization can be resilient while promoting sustainable initiatives to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa. On 14th March 2020, our Obuasi mine recorded its first case of COVID-19. It was the third case recorded in the country. About a week prior to that, and even before Ghana had recorded its first COVID-19 case, a multidisciplinary crisis management team had been formed and was already liaising with the municipal and district assemblies to put in place measures to address the global pandemic should the mine or the town of Obuasi be hit. In view of this, we were not unprepared, even though the situation was still novel. The mine had already been notably successful at reducing the incidence of malaria by 75% within a year in 2008, when it deployed the indoor residual spraying method of malaria control undertaken by our subsidiary AngloGold Ashanti Malaria Control Limited, AGAMA. With the support of the reliable data built by AGAMA and their well-developed systems for malaria control, as well as the team of doctors and other health specialists from our hospital, the AGA Health Foundation, the Obuasi mine was more than ready to manage the pandemic. Working hand in hand with the municipal and district health directorates, several interventions were rolled out in the communities. Some of these interventions worthy of note are the daily disinfection of all health facilities, numbering over 20 in the Obuasi community, and all major markets in the Obuasi town by AGAMA. Intensive educational campaign in Obuasi using AGAMA's information van, distribution of communication materials on COVID-19 prevention, mounting of billboards, posters, and propagating prevention messages on radio programs and through interviews. Production of the mine's own hand sanitizers approved by the Food and Drugs Authority of Ghana and distributed widely in the mine and its communities. Our doctors and health specialists supported through sample taking, dispatching for testing, and training personnel of the government hospital in sample taking. A well-resourced control room has been set up to receive and make calls concerning COVID-19 cases from the mine and from the communities, as well as monitoring cases and contacts in quarantine and isolation. A mobile app has been developed by our health professionals called the Obuasi COVID-19 Tracker, available on Android devices. This works by helping track symptoms of persons placed in self-isolation and quarantine, who may be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. With over 80% of cases and contacts being asymptomatic, the app has become a convenient tool for monitoring, enabling the contact tracing and monitoring teams to focus their attention where critically needed. A PCR testing facility has been set up in Obuasi. The AGA Health Foundation has also been upgraded with a fully equipped 3-bed intensive care unit to take care of critical cases should we have them. On the mine itself, a lot of other interventions have been made and continue to be made. And I'll go through a few of them. A crisis management committee is in place, as I mentioned earlier, that meets daily to focus solely on how the company manages the crisis. Remote working arrangements for all non-field workers has been implemented. Field workers were at some stage reorganized into different teams to reduce physical contact and to minimize the risk of losing a whole team to isolation at any point in time. Hand washing stations have been installed at various vantage points. Offices and workplaces are disinfected daily. Masks have been distributed and continue to be distributed to all employees and contractors regularly, and a no mask, no entry policy instituted. Turnstiles have been taken out at security entrances to ensure access without body contact. Fingerprint and biometric security arrangements and breathalyzers have been disabled at the mine's security entrances. High risk and vulnerable employees have been identified and managed on a case-by-case basis to reduce their exposure. A support system for employees who need psychological support has also been set up. Madam Chairperson, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is worth noting that the pandemic hit the Obuasi mine at a critical stage in the mine's redevelopment efforts, following a 5-year break in production since 2014. The mine had achieved first gold pour in December 2019 and had begun phase 2 of the redevelopment project, which includes, among others, the construction of a new tailings storage facility, and upgrading of the processing plant and underground infrastructure to ensure a ramp up in the rate of ore tons processed from 2,000 tons of ore per day to 4,000 tons of ore per day. We are proud to say that due to the effectiveness of the COVID interventions implemented, the Obuasi redevelopment projects continued and is on course without significant disruptions, albeit with delays to the schedule of the ramp-up. Our sustained success requires that we continue to work together, both as members of the AngloGold Ashanti family, as members of the broader business community, and as citizens of Ghana, in continuously identifying business improvement opportunities to sustain long-term benefits for the business and the community at large. AngloGold Ashanti Obuasi Mine is proud of the role it has played so far in curbing COVID-19 in the Obuasi community. Indeed, the effectiveness of the intervention and efforts in the Obuasi town was publicly acknowledged by the President of the Republic of Ghana in one of his nationwide addresses on COVID-19. As at 7th October 2020, the Obuasi community, including the Obuasi mine, had only one active case after a 3-week period of recording no new case. This is in sharp contrast to the previous situation where the Obuasi community was considered a hotspot in the country. We acted early and decisively to build a resilient Obuasi mine, and we hope that through consistency and adherence to the necessary interventions and protocols, we will see the end of COVID in due course. Thank you very much for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of the program. At this stage, I am pleased to be given the opportunity, or to have been given the opportunity, to introduce our main speaker for the day, Ms. Christine Ramon, the Interim Chief Executive Officer of AngloGold Ashanti. Christine has been the Interim CEO of AngloGold Ashanti since September 2020. Prior to her appointment as Interim CEO, she had served as AngloGold Ashanti's Chief Financial Officer since 2014. Before joining AngloGold Ashanti, Christine had held senior financial management and executive positions in various companies. These included serving as Chief Financial Officer and Executive Director of Sasol, and as Financial Director and subsequently CEO of Jonick Holdings. She is a Director of the World Gold Council and the International Council on Mining and Metals. She has previously served on the boards of MTN Group, International Federation of Accountants, Rand Refinery, Lafarge SA in France, Transnet, and Jonick Communications. A chartered accountant, Christine is a member of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants and the Public Accountants and Auditors Board in South Africa. She also previously served as a member of the Standing Advisory Committee to the International Accounting Standards Board and as Deputy Chair of the Financial Reporting Standards Council of South Africa. Her experience and contributions have been recognized in various ways, including being nominated as a Young Global Leader of the World Economic Forum, as well as being awarded the CFO of the Year in 2018. She was recently appointed to the Presidential Council for State-Owned Enterprises in South Africa. I could go on and on and on. Madam Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ms. Christine Ramon.
Thank you, Eric, for that very gracious introduction. And I would like to say good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think firstly, I just need to say there are a number of accountants that have spoken so far, so that's nice to see. But I especially would like to acknowledge the chairperson, Karen Akumi-Tano, as well as Professor Tsotsi Tsikata. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It certainly is a great honor for me to represent AngloGold Ashanti at this year's Business in Africa lecture, which for several years has been an important partnership with the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies. And of course, I would have loved to have been with you in Ghana today. But of course, I've visited Ghana, I need to say, on a number of occasions. It's a beautiful country, and I certainly look forward to visiting Ghana in the near future. It'll definitely be this year. But I think certainly, given that this year has been an extraordinary year, at least it is technology that has allowed us to come together. And I hope that this is going to be also a rich experience for you today. So I will share a particular perspective today from AngloGold Ashanti, Our company has deep roots both in South Africa and right here in Ghana. It is perspective that we have developed over time in building this company through any number of crises and economic cycles, and most recently by navigating through exceptionally choppy operating conditions that has been caused by the coronavirus pandemic. So as many of you know, AngloGold Ashanti has a long history in Ghana through its Obuasi and Iduapriem mines, and this history is proudly enshrined in our name. Ashanti is Ghanaian. So you may also know that we are on our way to reclaiming our place as one of your country's largest gold producers as we near the completion of our flagship project, the redevelopment of the iconic Obuasi gold mine, which Eric has referred to in his introduction. So we certainly see this as important for a host of reasons beyond the vital economic contribution that it will make to our business over the long term. It is also in many respects the fulfillment of a promise made almost 2 decades ago when these two companies came together. And that created AngloGold Ashanti. And that was really to recapitalize the mine and to ensure that it delivers on its own enormous potential. So, of course, while Obuasi steals so many of the headlines, we have had exceptional success over a long period of time at the Iduapriem mine near Tarkwa. It is a smaller operation. It's superbly run by a world-class Ghanaian operating team. And it's also a mine that continues to set the global benchmark for us in terms of operating efficiency and a strong social license to operate. So as we increase our investment at Obuasi, we know where our focus must lie. Like Iduapriem, we are prioritizing a local, skilled, and highly capable workforce to take this asset forward over the next 2 decades and more. Already 99.9% of our employees there are Ghanaian, and there is a concerted effort to grow that number even further in the years ahead. The issue of localization is a strategic one for us here in Ghana, but also at all of our other operations in Africa and in Latin America. This is true beneficiation, converting mineral wealth into human capital in the form of homegrown skills, which are at once adaptable, durable, and portable. And it is these skilled men and women who will create a truly sustainable business that is able to flourish throughout a range of operating conditions. Obuasi's redevelopment will also allow us to honor one of our most important values, which is to leave our host communities better off for our presence. And it is through this process that we continue to underwrite the development of local economies. So as we pour effort and resources into ensuring that we do create a positive legacy around our operations and in the country at large, we find that the massive disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has spared no country or industry, provides valuable lessons on how to create more resilience in communities and in our business. And as you know from the billings for today's event, I'll speak about building a resilient, sustainable organization during a global pandemic. This is in many respects a live case study informed by AngloGold Ashanti's experience over much of this year in dealing with a true black swan event. And it is an event that few saw coming and almost no one planned for. So in managing a large multi-jurisdictional company such as ours with 14 mines in 10 countries, through this kind of event has presented a unique set of challenges and some very valuable lessons. It has been one of those rare events that has touched everyone on earth, whether it is the jumbo operator at Obuasi or the accountant in Western Australia, the plant superintendent at Iduapriem, or the exploration geologist in Nevada. Each of us have had to deal not only with a more complex work environment full of new operating and regulatory challenges to overcome each day, but also in our personal lives where children have moved to homeschooling, offices have switched to remote work, and our ability to visit and care for loved ones has been difficult. So while we tackle this host of personal and professional complexities, the prospect of being exposed to ubiquitous, invisible, and potentially lethal virus has greatly raised levels of stress and anxiety. The pandemic has also catalyzed a multitude of intractable difficulties in every corner of the global economy, with surging unemployment, spiraling private and sovereign debt, and enormous damage to entire economic sectors like hospitality, commercial real estate, and tourism. And Africa has been harder hit than most. So it is important that we look through the economic destruction caused by the pandemic to find clues to creating a durable recovery for our continent. Firstly, we should consider what has worked. As we look at South Africa and Ghana in particular, it is clear that both have had strong and principled leadership at a national level. This has played no small role in helping to avert the worst case scenarios that looked all but certain for both countries at the end of March. Here in Ghana, that strong leadership has translated into an operating environment that was predictable and easier to navigate than it otherwise might have been. We also understood clearly from the outset what the restrictions were, why they were in place, and what we needed to do to comply with them. So skilled technicians needed to complete the shaft refurbishment at Obuasi, and others to program the systems for the plant were unable to travel to site because of simultaneous border closings across most of our operating geographies. Mills were stuck on the dock in China, and international transportation networks seized up, making some crew rotations impossible. So together, these limitations caused a 3-month delay in the Obuasi redevelopment schedule. So the phase 2 of Obuasi, which was originally planned to be completed at the end of this year, is now being shifted to the end of March next year. So clearly the easing of those restrictions, however, has been matched with an efficient bureaucracy and supportive regulators, which have helped us to limit the time lost. So clearly this kind of collaboration between governments, businesses, and other stakeholders have been one of the more positive aspects of the pandemic. The closer cooperation in many instances born out of necessity has been crucial in limiting the spread of the virus and in limiting hardship. So we must take care to consolidate these relationships and build on them in the months and years ahead as we chart the path towards a recovery. And as we look to that recovery, the mining industry across much of the globe has shown itself to be a responsible and caring partner in the fight against the pandemic, adept at providing support for its host communities in areas of the most acute need. These efforts have started with employees and in so many circumstances have extended well beyond traditional spheres of influence, supplementing emergency support provided by governments and civil society organizations. Mining companies have brought to the table their supply chains, their logistical capabilities, and their proven ability to adapt and to respond quickly to rapidly changing conditions. And it is, after all, what we do best. So before I delve into our specific situation at AngloGold Ashanti, it's important to reinforce that there is no room for complacency. I recognize that the current situation appears to be a lot better than scenarios sketched barely 6 months ago, but the pandemic continues to lurk nearby. So So we must remain vigilant as ever to ensure conditions continue to improve and that we keep our people safe and that we protect our economies from devastation that will come with the resurgence in infections. So if you'll allow me, I would like to provide some concrete details, a case study of sorts about how our company not only survived, but also came together stronger and more resilient, 9 months into what will certainly be one of the most unique and unforgettable episodes of our generation. I'll ask you to cast your mind back to January, when the first World Health Organization advisories on the pandemic were made. At that time, the prevailing sense in many quarters was that this, like the SARS and the MERS viruses before it, would be likely someone else's problem. A serious virus that would ultimately be contained and eventually dwindle away. At AngloGold Ashanti, our health team's battle hardened from the Ebola campaign barely 5 years ago. So we were more cautious. They were more cautious in their prognosis. They followed closely developments around the spread of the virus, which had still not been named. On their advice, we altered and updated our protocols and travel advisories as the new coronavirus grew from an epidemic to a global pandemic. The truth is that even with a cautious posture, the escalation in seriousness and the consequential impact on our business was alarmingly quick from mid-March to the end of that month. So many of you here today may remember that the third case in Ghana was an AngloGold Ashanti employee, a Ghanaian who had recently returned from a holiday in the UK. He presented himself to our hospital with flu-like symptoms and was quickly tested and quarantined, and his contacts traced. The system designed and tested during the regional Ebola crisis worked as it should. It also provided a glimpse of how critical the cooperation between the health ministry, local government, and our own health teams would be in the months ahead, as we work together with a shared sense of purpose to turn back the tide. At AngloGold Ashanti, we quickly shared information of that first case, patient 0, through our traditional internal communication channels, though we would soon realize that we needed to vastly improve our levels of engagement with information that could impact the health of our employees and their families. It's important here to note the immense calm and maturity of the Ghanaian government throughout this process. They remained level-headed and methodically built the plan, not starting from scratch, but focusing on adapting systems already in place. They ensured public health was prioritized while taking steps to minimize the impacts to critical businesses. It set the tone for what remains, in our view, one of the world's more effective responses to the virus. At the same time, we were starting to see material impacts on our Australian operations as the government there began to introduce a series of quickly changing protocols to limit the spread before it gained real momentum. We saw the unprecedented step of international and domestic travel restrictions come into force, as well as quarantine periods for inbound travellers. Our Australian team adapted with impressive speed, changing shift rosters, quickly making long-term accommodation arrangements for out-of-state employees, and setting up a battery of new protocols to align with government regulations. Logistics were modified, social distancing enforced, and a first for the company, quarantines enforced for arriving travellers. At around this time in mid-March, we established a cross-functional team to manage our response across the business using the now all too familiar electronic platforms, which in spite of our geographical isolation, facilitated a very inclusive approach. So each site brought its operators, its supply chain specialists, health and safety teams, security personnel, lawyers, and government relations people, amongst others. In very tightly managed daily calls, we received live updates of the situation in each country. We developed a steady cadence of communication as infections around the world started to climb and as our sites started to report cases. Over one weekend in May, following our first case in South Africa, 196 employees tested positive. Like the cases reported in Ghana in the preceding weeks, when a voluntary testing campaign was launched in the Obuasi district, almost all these cases were asymptomatic. We had a base level of understanding from our colleagues in Ghana how to deal with contact tracing, isolation, and quarantine. We were able to again refine our experience when Brazil experienced its spike a few weeks later. Our daily interactions provided the opportunity for real-time sharing of information. We were able to quickly surface problems and harness the full weight and experience of the organization to deal with them. We discussed solutions and shared them seamlessly. Sites were able to adapt quickly, relying on the shared experience of peers without having to go through the same learning curve. So this certainly brought the organization together with a common purpose, deepening cooperation internally and creating a sense of community that we had not seen before. At the same time, our health and sustainability specialists, led by our impressive public health specialist, Dr. Bafadile Chauke, kept abreast of the emerging best practices across the globe and quickly provided guidance accordingly. We were amongst the first company to enforce a no mask, no work rule, which we believe had tremendous benefit at our operations. We also took clear steps to protect vulnerable employees. Importantly, we made sure that all learnings, whatever the origin, were accurately captured, quickly shared, and then translated into practical policies and standardized operating procedures to ensure that they were adopted by each site. And this certainly provided a real-time dynamic blueprint for adaptation across our operations as the illness spread. So mine sites are some of the most controlled environments anywhere in the world. Once you walk through the gate at Obuasi, at Ahafo, or at Tarkwa, you enter a world of structure and rules, a world where extraordinary efforts are undertaken to manage and reduce risk. And that made mine sites incredibly receptive to the measures taken to limit COVID-19 spread, like hand washing, wearing of PPE, to name a few. But our health teams never failed to remind us that during a health emergency, and in fact in almost any situation, the site is only as strong as the community in which it exists. That is an incredibly valuable lesson for any business, but especially one in the extractive industry. That meant we needed to work hand in glove with local government, understanding their specific needs in tackling the pandemic, the capabilities and limitations, as well as where we could help most. From the outset, our aim was not to presume what was needed, but to collaborate closely with the authorities and working to understand their needs in order to buttress their response, whether it was providing hand washing stations in areas with no piped water supply, sharing our healthcare facilities, or providing PPE and specific medical equipment. Again, this is an approach that should not be limited to times of crisis. We can almost certainly guarantee better, more impactful outcomes from our community investment projects if we take a more collaborative approach in dealing with stakeholders, creating the space for meaningful dialogue and listening before we act. It was also at this time, before the shock of the first major lockdowns, that we took the time as a leadership team to sketch the contours of our approach. We decided to take an unashamedly conservative posture as we managed our way through the period. We prioritized clear, transparent communication to all stakeholders, internally and externally, and pledged to anticipate emerging risks wherever possible and to adjust our approach quickly when facts supported it. We decided unequivocally to place the health of our employees and our host communities at the center of our decision-making. But we had to ensure that this wasn't simply a platitude. In order to do this, we had to ensure that we also looked after the health of our business. We needed to maintain a solid financial foundation, specifically a strong balance sheet that could help us withstand severe production shocks, even if our mines were shut down for protracted periods of time. To this end, we secured additional credit lines, providing $1 billion of additional liquidity that we could access even in the most difficult conditions. Our thinking was simply this, that we would do whatever possible to prevent getting into a difficult financial situation, one that might force us to make desperate choices. And while this additional liquidity was important, it was the decisions made 6 years earlier to radically reduce debt and costs in order to deal with difficult operating environments at the time that provided us the best protection in the unfolding pandemic. We also looked closely at our operations to gauge the ability to continue operating if border closures tightened further and lasted longer than originally forecast. So while efficient capital allocation dictates that minimal levels of inventories of spares and supplies be held at site, we decided early on to build an inventory buffer of between 3 and 6 months of stocks on site in the event there was a severe breakdown in supply chain functioning. Similarly, where we could do so, we built ore stockpiles that would enable us to maintain production levels, even if we faced constraints in getting full staff complements to and from our sites. So the combination of increased liquidity alongside a more resilient supply chain enabled us to make bolder decisions, particularly during the early months of hard lockdowns. In South Africa, which was hardest hit by the government-enforced mine closures, we decided to pay full salaries and benefits to all employees. So while the cost was significant, the goodwill this created amongst our work crews allowed us a fast, safe, and efficient ramp-up to near full production once the rules allowed it. Closing down and restarting major mining operations in the midst of a public health emergency is no simple task. Indeed, even keeping mines operating over this period could never be taken for granted. It was vital that everyone affected, from employees to host communities and from contractors and suppliers to unions and regulators, were confident that we were always on top of the issues. Without that confidence, we would simply have had no license to operate. There were ample examples of this in the US, where warehouses and food processing facilities went unstaffed as workers refused to operate in unsafe conditions. So in every jurisdiction, including here in Ghana, our teams kept in very close touch with all local stakeholders, informing them of the real challenges we were facing, the risks that presented themselves, and the steps taken to mitigate them. These were honest conversations with people who had real skin in the game. And it was this dialogue that allowed us to build trust and to create solutions together, whether if it was securing access to testing, designing social distancing plans, or bolstering the number of available hospital beds, it ran the full gamut. And I'm confident in saying that without strong relationships and unbroken dialogue, at a time when people were anxious and fearful, we would not have emerged as we have. In looking back over the first 6 months of the year, we saw stoppages in Argentina, Brazil, and South Africa of around 85,000 ounces in lost production. And that was a lot better than we feared. The impact on costs was less than 3% of our total, which was also manageable in the context of our larger portfolio. So, having run through AngloGold Ashanti's story in reacting to COVID-19, it will be useful to first consider the lessons learned and to understand some of the impacts. First, it's worth going back to some basic principles around risk mitigation. We've seen firsthand that a diverse portfolio, a strong balance sheet, and a varied supply chain are all crucial in managing risk. Response in the heat of a crisis is important, but the real defensive positions are created well before an emergency hits us. In our case, the strategic decision to create a diverse portfolio was taken 2 decades ago and has stood us in very good stead. In the same vein, a clear strategic view that when it comes to debt, less is more, and that has been a saving grace for us. The road to debt reduction was a painful one for AngloGold Ashanti. To achieve that, we had to commit to several years of austerity, making deep and long-lasting cuts to our corporate costs, rooting out wasteful spending, and taking a zero-tolerance approach to duplication of activities. We invested in the things that mattered, like technology to improve safety, new mining infrastructure, and the development of our ore bodies. We never stopped training and developing our people, recognizing all the while that without them, we had no chance of creating a sustainable business. We even took the very difficult decision to sell some prize assets to further reduce debt and protect the integrity of the business. We also never abandoned our first principles of disciplined capital allocation, which was that every dollar invested needed to yield a return at or above our targeted levels. And those targets were set always at conservative gold prices. We had learned over and over again to plan for the worst and hope for the best. We've also been fortunate to have an exceptional supply chain, but we also needed to increase the resilience and dependability of our supply network. For mining companies operating in emerging markets like ours, this includes prioritizing local procurement wherever possible. While we have made this a strategic priority in recent years, COVID-19 has reinforced the importance of a meaningful portion of expenditure flowing to local communities. It's just good business and an essential ingredient in improving legitimacy. Equally, as we face a world in which moving people from country to country is significantly more challenging than any time in the last several decades, the development of the full suite of skills locally will become similarly vital to the success of any business. We must not be lulled into a sense of complacency. The biggest mistake any of us could make is to believe that the worst is behind us and to revert to old modes of working. The unfortunate reality is that COVID-19 is not going to disappear anytime soon, with some scientists predicting annual surges in infections through to 2025 and beyond. All you need to do is look at the global statistics each day to understand that infections can reaccelerate at any time, and that as long as they do, people will continue to get sick and die. We therefore cannot lower our guard. So as an industry, we will need to look carefully at our processes around risk and why it was that the prospect of a major global pandemic was almost totally missed. The pandemic has emphasized glaring gaps across the world in public healthcare systems and in general societal inequality. It has laid bare the consequences of this neglect, and that the poorest are also the most vulnerable to the health impacts of the pandemic. But it has also awoken many states to the realization that strong measures must be taken to stop future pandemics and to protect citizens on both sides of the income divide. We, as an industry, need to ensure that we work alongside government and civil society to do something about this. This is admittedly a big challenge that is beyond our strength as an industry to tackle alone, but it is important that we start to look at innovative ways to start influencing the debate and addressing these systemic issues. So while our ability to navigate the treacherous operating landscape of this year is a source of pride for us, the far greater sense of achievement comes from the knowledge that not one of our employees was prejudiced financially as a result of the pandemic. It is from knowing that we could join hands with our employees, with our host communities, and with civil society to address an international emergency. As we look to the painful economic recovery that lies ahead, it is this kind of open dialogue and close collaboration that will determine whether if we succeed or fail. There is no doubt that economic hardship in our host countries and host communities, whether in Australia, Africa, or Latin America, has increased sharply. Many traditional economic sectors have been hit hard by the pandemic and by the measures that governments have taken to slow its spread. Tourism, hospitality, travel, commercial, real estate, manufacturing, and the list goes on. That means all governments will be facing a similar issue, which is how to balance the books, keep tax receipts up, maintain service delivery, and generally kickstart the economies again. Companies and their industry representatives will need to continue to communicate clearly, demonstrating to their host governments that consistency in regulatory and legislative environments is more important now than ever as the competition for investment ramps up. And if they to stimulate further long-term investment in mining projects that will deliver taxes, jobs, and benefits well beyond the current crisis. Again, we believe that it is consistency and a long-term view that will win the day. For our part, mining companies have this year proven their resolve in the face of a terrible and potentially long-lasting crisis, and we too must take the long view and make decisions that will help them flourish over the long term in tandem with our host communities. These will include commitments to our employees and to our hosts in line with our values that must be honored and hopefully improved upon. And there is simply no margin for error here. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will now open the call up for questions.
So thank you very much, Christina Ramon. That was very, very interesting. And I'm hoping that we had a few business students or business leaders here, because a lot of the things you've pointed out, I think, would make a very good basis for discussion and charting a way forward for all businesses, not just the huge multinationals such as AngloGold Ashanti, but also for some of the smaller businesses that we have in Ghana. I'm wondering if at this point we have any questions. There's one question, I believe, from Amina Mama. I'm having difficulties accessing the question, though. A question about the African Free Trade Zone. Could we have some more details on that question, please? Okay. Christina, it looks like you're going to get away with no questions.
No, that's a question. Could we?
Yes.
Could you ask Amina to unmute herself so she could ask her question, please?
Okay. All right. Could I ask Amina Mama, please, to unmute yourself so you can ask the question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
Sorry,
Yes,
I'm trying to type the question, but I'd rather just ask it. I want to thank Ms. Ramon for the lecture, which really taught me a lot about Anglo-Ashanti gold, which I'm just getting to know as as the incoming chair. My question, first of all, I want to say that I'm very impressed with the way you as a corporation have been able to respond and be a learning organization and build on the accumulation of Africa's crises and therefore be proactive. So that's a crisis. I want to ask you about the upcoming opportunity of Africa becoming the world's biggest free trade zone in the world. And if AngloGold has any strategies for leveraging that to benefit Africa as opposed to the global corporation itself. And I'm asking you because I can hear how well you collaborate with your workers, who clearly must be quite well organized. And the received view is that the Africa Free Trade Zone will only benefit the 1% unless measures are taken to make sure that ordinary Africans can also benefit from this enormous, unique opportunity for economic transformation. So how are you envisaging addressing that, the benefits of the free trade zone and bringing them to Africa?
So thanks for the question, Amina, and thank you also for acknowledging, I guess, the efforts made by AngloGold Ashanti. I think, certainly if I can talk about Africa in our overall portfolio currently contributes about 60% to our overall company's production and more than that actually from an EBITDA or an earnings perspective. So Africa is a significant contributor to the overall. I think, of course, as a company, given that it is such a significant contribution, I think when you look at the key pillars of our strategy as a company, certainly sustainable development and as I said in my discussion, also the fact that we actually do want to have a positive impact on the host communities and in the countries that we actually operate in is actually very much part of the approach that we do take for sustainable development. So whilst, and like I said, it's part of our strategic framework, it's having that inclusive, sustainable approach. And as I've said, that we do focus very much on local procurement, on localization, on sharing economic benefits in a very fair way with the governments that we in the countries that we operate in. And so by looking at this approach from a holistic perspective and looking at our strategy really from a holistic perspective, I think that's where you see that collaboration between companies and the host governments, the host communities. It's really a partnership. And it's only by continuing this form of partnership. I mean, mining should not be seen as an extractive industry. It's named as an extractive industry, but I think it's really about having it as a holistic, sustainable approach that is going to help achieve, I'd say, the targets that's actually set for the Africa Free Trade Zone. It's not going to be a siloed approach. It's going to be very much that collaboration and working together. So I hope, certainly from our company's perspective, we see Africa, even though it's 60% today, there's Abuasi. We've also got mines. We've got a joint venture in the DRC, in Congo, Gator mine that we've actually got in Tanzania. We've got a mine in Guinea. So these are actually very important. Also from a growth prospects for our company perspective, they offer significant potential, and they will contribute significantly towards the African economy, and that's really where I see it benefiting the aim of the Africa Free Trade Zone.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramon. I have another question here, and it's as follows. In some respects, it is clear that gold mining companies have been relatively fortunate in that the pandemic has not had a shattering impact on their business when compared to the dire effect we've seen in some areas of the economy. Going forward, how can AngloGold Ashanti work to ensure that it continues to shield itself from any further downturns?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and you're absolutely correct in that gold companies have not been impacted the same way as other industries. But I think quite importantly is, and this is the approach that's been taken by our company, it's really taking a long-term view, keeping the focus also on delivering on the long-term strategic priorities of the company. So it's not to be carried away by the current gold price environment and clearly, what people might perceive, as part of our strategy, it's very much keeping the focus on cost and capital discipline, but it's also continuing to advance. When it comes to capital discipline, it's to ensure that we adopt conservative, or one might call it conservative or prudent assumptions in terms of long-term investment decisions. It's continuing to invest in improving our reserve life, so investing in the integrity of our ore bodies to ensure that we adopt a longer-term sustainable approach. So I think it's very important that companies, even though they are in great shape currently, it's that they do keep focus on the strategic priorities and the disciplines that actually should prevail in all times, whether it is good times or bad times. As a matter of fact, you would have seen in our company already 20 years ago, an approach was taken to diversify the portfolio, and that has made us more resilient, but also similarly to maintain financial flexibility in the company. We had to reduce debt, and we had to take decisions to actually to sell off some core assets. We sold off a core asset in the US to reduce debt in the company, and we really kept the focus on cost reduction. And of course, now it's really keeping the focus on the strategic priorities, but not also losing sight of the longer term optionality in our business. And so, it's really keeping all of that intact. It's not the easiest to do it in tough times, but this is the time where we really need to button down and keep the focus. And I think quite importantly, it's also about keeping the focus on health and safety protocols in the business, and continued collaboration with government and with the communities that we hosted by.
Thank you very much. I have another really interesting one. One can see clearly that the COVID-19 pandemic had a great impact on the economic sphere of business, yet it's also impacted the psychological well-being of staff. How did AngloGold Ashanti manage to provide the needed support?
Yeah, so that is an absolute focus for us. I must say it's been, in our company, in terms of employee well-being, even before the COVID pandemic, we've always had a very strong focus. Safety is our first value, and then we've always kept a very strong focus on health and employee well-being. I think, certainly it needed to be strengthened over this time because, like I said to you, in the discussion a bit earlier, that it's been quite psychologically, it's been quite a tough environment for our employees. I think both those that have been working at the office and at the mines. I think it's really we had to also place reliance on is firstly continued communication has been important during this time. We had sort of daily task force teams that met on a daily basis. It's not on a daily basis now, but but I think keeping that constant focus and communication with the organization. But then also we had to place reliance on the health teams that we had, both at corporate as well as throughout our operations, to ensure that the mental well-being of staff were taken care of, and also that assistance was offered to not only to employees but to their family. I think also ensuring that there's flexible working arrangements that's been put in place. And we've also put in place measures to safeguard high-risk employees with comorbidities. So, for example, when it came to the office environment, we did shut down the office environment and encouraged employees to work from home. But even though now we are working back at the office, and similarly at the mine sites, we've actually asked for employees who have high risk, who are high risk or have comorbidities, not to come to work. And I think, I think also providing employees with financial, let's just say, with the comfort that their pay was not being impacted during any of this time, whether we were in lockdown or not, also gave comfort. But I think it is something that it's one we're learning, and I think it's certainly a program that we've had, but I think we're going to need to constantly reassess and strengthen as we go forward.
Thank you very much. I think I have a couple more questions. One of the effects of COVID-19 was the restrictions on travels, especially for expatriates.
Yeah.
I can imagine that this was true for AngloGold also. How can experiences from COVID-19 and how AngloGold managed with using mainly locals to hold the fort amidst the pandemic shape up policies on capacity building for local employees and recruitment of expatriate staff? Do you see any changes in that area?
I absolutely do see changes. I think definitely, we've always had a policy that we do strengthen and we focus on increasing local skills development and for employees. So like I said, in Ghana, it's 99.9%. And in most of the countries that we operate in, it is largely a local, local employment. But I think, certainly in Obuasi, we do have on the project itself, we do employ some expatriates for the build of the project, and it's in phase 2 of development. And it's really in that area where we did see the impact from critical skills perspective. So I think, what we did see during this time, and Eric can come in if he'd like as well, is that we did see commitment from the contractors that we used. Many of them actually stayed on site for an extended period of time. I mean, some were on site for 5 to 6 months before rotating back to their home country. But I think what this has emphasized for us, and certainly what we needed to do as well in the rotations that did eventually happen, is that we needed to get, to collaborate with government once again and get the permits that were required at the time when it was permitted. We also had to put charters in place for our bullion, for the transport of our bullion. And so it's all along it's been collaboration, but it has emphasized the to localize even further, and that will certainly be a much greater focus going forward. But I do need to say that it's a very significant priority for us as a company, because it's diversification, but it's the localization and all of that, the working together with communities and government. It's a very holistic approach that we've adopted in this regard, but the focus will be more so on that going forward.
Okay, and the last question is a bit of a, it's a political one. Can you speak to the African Union's Agenda 2063 and role that organizations like yours can contribute to its success?
So I must say to you that I'm not sort of fully cited on the two. So you say agenda for 2063, but I think it speaks broadly to that as a company, we are very much aligned to the African agenda. So as much as we are a global company, we're more of an African company. I mean, really deep root, started off in South Africa, spread across Africa with the merger, of Ashanti Goldfields with AngloGold. So we are a deeply rooted African company with operations across the world, and significantly so in Africa. So I can say to you that, without me knowing the detail of the agenda, I think I can tell you that it will be, we see the company growing and contributing to the prosperity of Africa, and contributing to inclusive and sustainable growth in Africa. And that is what I can say going forward. We also have, some board members that's been recently appointed, in particular, Dr. Kojo Busia. I think he's well known to you, and I think he would be certainly contributing to our sustainable development and contribution to the agenda for the African Union.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramon. I think time is fast spent. We were originally looking at ending at about 4:20. We're only 10 minutes over time. And I've pretty much dealt with most of the questions. I'd like to say thank you very much, Ms. Ramon. It's been a pleasure having you. Your presentation was succinct, detailed, and I think there's a lot in there that will help us going forward. We wish you all the best. AGA is one of the companies that we consider to be partly Ghanaian now, and Obuasi and Eduaprim are both, companies that we look forward to doing really well. To round up, I'll say that we've learned quite a bit. What my takeaways from here are that one of the most important things is to have a government in place that understands the business and is prepared to deal, is prepared to negotiate, and prepared to meet you more than halfway. Building health teams within the companies is always a benefit because it allows you to link with the local health authorities, the Ministry of Health, and to ensure that the health of your staff, the people on the mines and so on, is being taken care of. And it's instructive to see that the third person who contracted COVID in Ghana was actually an AGA employee, and yet that was handled really well, in spite of the fact that the mines are quite far away from the cities where we know the effective health services are available. Looking at AGA's position with regards to risk management, I mean, for those of us who are in that area, it's really impressive. Looking at how you reduced your debt, how you actually sold assets in order to make the organization stronger. Agreed, these are things you were doing anyway before the pandemic came along, but it really helped with ensuring the resilience of the business. The built-in redundancies to do with stockpiling, in spite of the fact that this is costing you money, also made sure that you were able to continue working and business not dipping too much in spite of the problems. Increased liquidity alongside a more resilient supply chain enabled you to make bolder decisions. There's so much to learn from here. And rather than me going through it one by one, I think I'm reliably informed that this document is going to be published by the Institute of African Studies. And also, this is streaming on Facebook, so it's all available. Once again, I'd like to say thank you to the Institute of African Studies for making this happen, to the ladies and gentlemen at Gold House and Talitha in Johannesburg, and to William and Echo. Thank you very much for making everything work. In spite of the really shaky comms, I think we've learned a lot. Thank you very much, Madam Director, for making it happen. And we look forward to all the publications and to next year's lecture. So thanks to all. And I think at this point, we can end the lecture here. A little bit over time, but not too much. Okay.
Thank you very much from my side. It was an absolute pleasure and so wonderful connecting with you all. And I look forward to visiting Ghana, like I said, soon. Thank you.
And we look forward to having you.
Thank you.
I wonder if Madam Director has anything she'd like to say.
Just goodbye and thank you. Yabonga.
Yabonga to you also. Thank you very much.